Master Gardener. We are a part of the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension. Every county in Arizona has a cooperative extension office, and there's lots of programs. You may be familiar with some of the others we have, such as 4-H, food safety, nutrition education, STEM and commercial horticulture, and small acreage support. Master gardeners provide science-based horticulture information, and tonight's presentation is on growing table grapes. As you see, we've just notified you it's going to be recorded, so please click that OK. Now, our speaker tonight is Rich Peterson. Rich earned a Bachelor of Science degree in geology from Arizona State University and has a 28-year career as a geologist and program director in oil and gas exploration and production research projects. After retiring from that career, he was diligent and came to Chino to pursue more degrees at Yavapai College in green building technology and agriculture. And both of those he'd had long-standing personal interest in. Rich completed the Yavapai County Cooperative Extension Master Gardener course in 2011 and is an active member today of the Master Gardener Association. For the past 6 years, Rich has been a Yavapai College production horticulture adjunct instructor, teaching assistant, and a greenhouse technician. With Rich's close association to Yavapai College and the Master Gardener Association, he strives to foster mutually beneficial relationships between those two groups. And I've experienced, he's been very successful. So with that, Rich, it's all yours. Take it away.
Okay, thank you, Tricia. And we go to my opening slide here. Everybody can see it, I hope. And thank all of you for joining me tonight to learn more about growing grapes, table grapes in the Prescott area. Before we get started though, let me give you a bit more background information. Tricia mentioned that I'm a Yavapai County Master Gardener. I'm a small acreage grower and own and manage Cielo Azul Vineyard, Cielo Azul meaning blue sky in Portuguese, as well as Spanish. I also work, as Tricia mentioned, as staff and instructor in the production horticulture at Yavapai College Greenhouse Facility in Chino Valley. In the YC program, I work closely with faculty instructor Justin Brereton. Justin teaches horticulture and has taught viticulture classes and has also been involved in working at several vineyards in the Verde Valley area. So he and I closely collaborate. I use him as a mentor for questions on growing grapes and horticulture questions, and is a good source of information. And one of our discussion points early on was what table grapes might do well in the Chino Valley and general Prescott areas. We really hadn't seen very much in the way of table grape production around here, so we were interested in what's going to do well. And that discussion 8 years ago now set in motion the beginnings of Cielo Azul Vineyard, and why I consider it to be more of an experimental vineyard than a production vineyard. And by experimental, I mean my approach has been to start multiple table grape varieties with the intent of determining which varieties to recommend to the public and to offer them through either our Yavapai College plant sales or through my involvement in the Master Gardener program. And this experimental approach and evaluations are continuing. And I hope to impart to you tonight some of my grape growing knowledge that I've gained over the last 8 years or so to all of you tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. I've structured this presentation more for the home gardener or small scale grower rather than the production grower. So we'll do a lot of the basics of those areas that you see shown on this slide. And then as a form of summary and review, I will present a case history of my own grow out program at Cielo Azul Vineyard that'll touch on each of those aspects of getting started. So a lot of times when people find out that I have a vineyard, they always ask, oh, are you going to be making wine? And I always say, no, I'm growing table grapes. And the next question is, well, what's the difference between wine grapes and table grapes? So this table kind of summarizes in a general mode the differences between them. First of all, wine grapes on the left, different species, Vitis vinifera, and those are usually European heritage, versus table grapes on the right, Vitis labrusca, which are American heritage. Wine grapes typically have seeds to give the wine flavor and structure. Table grapes can be either way, seedless or seeded. Seedless, I think, are the preferred consumer varieties. Wine grapes have thicker skins that add more tannins to the wine. Table grapes have thinner skins. Wine grapes have higher sugar content, which equates to a higher alcohol volume compared to table grapes that have a lower sugar content on the order of 10 to 15% versus 22 to 30% for their counterparts. Wine grapes more acidity, table grapes less acidity. Wine grapes can tolerate poor rocky soils, whereas table grapes need more fertile soil. Pruning, not too much difference there. Table grapes can be either spur pruned or cane pruned, and we'll touch on each of those a bit later on in this presentation. And finally, yield about 10 pounds per vine for wine grapes and up to 30 for a mature vine on the table grape side. And just the other fun fact here is it takes about 100 pounds of wine grapes to make 5 gallons of wine. So if you're going to be growing grapes to have an intent to grow wine or to make wine, it's going to take quite a few vines to create a volume there. So moving on, the basics of vine structure. Here we see the graphic shows a grapevine and some of the terminology that I'll be using this evening, just so we're all on the same page here. In the center is the trunk. Cordons are a horizontal extension of the trunk along this fruiting wire here. Buds form along the canes or cordons, and the node is where the leaf meets the cane. Right there at that juncture is the node. And shoots in the springtime will push out from those nodes, and it's on those shoots that form the grapes, the grape clusters. Canes are generally regarded as the shoots after the green shoot has hardened up after in dormancy. They call it the cane then. Spurs are shoots that have 2 to 5 buds on them, something like that. And then suckers are the shoots that come out from the base of the plant, as shown in the graphic. So just a few basic terminology points here. First and foremost, what I want to cover is climate and site selection. Some of the climate considerations for grapes are the winter low temperatures and which varieties to select, the timing of the spring frost, the number of frost-free days, the number of growing degree days, and a lot of these parameters that I've named off in these bullets here, you can find for your own local community, whether it's Chino or anywhere in Arizona or anywhere in the West at this particular website. That's WRCC, meaning Western Region Climate Center. .dri.edu. There's a lot of different branching on that site. So the easiest way to find climate data for your area is just put in your search engine WRCC and and the name of your location, like Chino Valley or Prescott or Sedona, wherever it may be. And usually it's the first on page one, number one, for the site, where you can see all of this information in tabular form, um, and be very exact about it. I'm going to cover each of these bullets here in some detail, starting with the winter low temperatures, grape varieties and winter low temperatures. So on a macro scale, Prescott and Chino Valley areas are in USDA zone 7B, which means we have winter lows of 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see on the map on the right-hand side that if you live in another area, you can go to either this arborday.org or USDA hardiness zone map and put in your zip code, and it'll give you your zone that you live in. But in addition to knowing what zone you're in, you have to be aware of your microclimates within your particular zone, which would shift your winter lows up or down, and can make the difference in a successful vineyard depending on the grape variety. So a microclimate might be a warm south-facing wall, whether that's a fence or the house wall under an eave type of thing that is sheltered from some of the cold temperatures, as opposed to a microclimate that pushes the temperature down. That might be along a river valley, where cold air drainage is a factor. And why don't we touch on that microclimate just a little bit more here with this next slide. So vineyards and cold air traps is this the point being made on this particular graphic. And you can relate areas such as Paulden being with the, let me describe this graphic, what we're seeing here. On one side or on both sides, we have cold plateaus, highlands, where it's higher elevations and cold air accumulates up there. And cold air being denser, flows like a river. It wants to flow to the lowest location, and that would be the river valleys or the dry washes that are in the very bottom of the adjacent valley. And so this could be an area like Paulden, with Big Chino Wash being in the river valley, so to speak, and highlands on one side with Big Black Mesa, and cold air like the river I mentioned, the river analogy. The air wants to flow down to the lowest point. It could be, for example, the Camp Verde area or anywhere along the Verde River in the Verde Valley, where the highlands are Mingus Mountain, and cold air drains off going down towards the Verde River, where it accumulates, that cold air accumulates in the bottom, and making it a very difficult place to grow grapes in, because that cold air is ponding there and just is not a conducive environment to grow in. And you can see on here on the left-hand side of the image, it shows a vineyard with the cold air draining past the vineyard. And that is the situation that Jerome is in. Jerome has its own microclimate where cold air drains through and on its way down to the river valley down below. And in fact, there is a commercial vineyard in Jerome, and they can grow fig trees in Jerome. And amongst us horticultural types, it's known as the banana belt in Jerome, because they can grow so many different things at 5,100 feet elevation that we cannot grow here at 4,600 feet in Chino Valley. And a tree line can, shown on the right-hand side of that particular graphic, tree line can even act as a dam for cold air that accumulates behind it. So think of that analogy of cold air flowing like a river down to the lowest spot. Anything that can stop it or impede it is going to mean cold air accumulates and may not be to your advantage for growing grapes. So let's move on then. Timing of spring frosts. Arizona climate is such that warm days begin in April. This is in the Prescott Chino Valley area now that I'm talking about in particular. And freezing temps can still occur into May. So the median date, meaning the 50% probability of the last spring frost at the Prescott Airport, is April 30th. In Chino Valley, it's May 18th. And this information was on that Western Region Climate Center website. And 50% probability just means that there's a 50% chance of, in Chino Valley after May 18th, 50% chance that there's going to be another frost. And every day that goes by, the chances get less and less, but still a chance of frost still occurring. So any vines with a bud break in April, which is what the typical bud break is for the grapevines in this area in Prescott and Chino Valley, any late spring frost can damage or kill newly emerged grapevine shoots and grape clusters. So that is pretty high on the list of factors to consider is your microclimate and your timing of spring frosts. Moving on, number of frost-free days. The freeze-free season, which is the period of time from the last spring frost to the first fall frost, 179 days at the Prescott Airport, 153 days in Chino Valley. And table grapes need about 150 to 180 days to fully mature, depending on if it's, there are early, mid, and late season varieties, but most of the time, the length of the growing season is going to be just fine and not an issue in the Prescott area. If you live in some of the higher elevation areas, though, if you want to grow grapes in Groom Creek or other high elevation areas, it might be a challenge. It might be doable with early ripening varieties, but you'd have to look closely at some of the information associated with those varieties to make sure. Growing degree days is another measure of climate that's used to assess grape variety suitability for an area. And don't really want to get too much into the weeds of how it's all calculated, but essentially it's an accumulation of degrees over 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And the way to look at it is hotter climates have more growing degree days than a colder climate. So the average annual accumulation of GDD values I've shown in this bullet on this particular slide, where Jerome, we mentioned that as a grape growing area. They have growing degree days of 4,500, Prescott Airport 3,400, Chino 3,300, Prescott 2,900, little shorter on the growing degree days. And the last two I've shown there are a couple of wine growing or grape growing areas, Napa being, of course, known for wine grapes, 2,600, 2,674 for their average growing degree days. And Geneva, New York, which is upstate New York in the Cornell, near the Cornell Research Center for USDA, where a lot of the cold climate table grape varieties were developed. They have 2,500. So you can see that we're right in the sweet spot there of 2,900 to 3,400 for growing in this area. Bottom line here, though, is that table grapes developed for the cold climates in upstate New York are the most suitable for the Prescott area. And some of the hot climate table grapes may not be suitable. For example, Thompson seedless is a hot climate table grape variety that can be grown in Phoenix, but I'm not sure it is suitable for the cooler climate, the growing degree days we have up here. This slide shows some of the wine varieties. I'm not totally excluding wine grapes from my discussion tonight, but it shows the number of degree days and some of the grape types, wine grape types that are grown in these regions. So that region 1 would be an early ripening variety at 2,500 degree days. Region 2, grape varieties that are growing there. Region 3, which is where we kind of fall with the Prescott Chino Valley area with 3,000, 3,500 degree days. We have these other varieties. 4 and 5 are getting into the warm climates where that's where you start to see the Thompson seedless, for example, being a table grape that is growing at these higher degree days. And I mentioned earlier in my opening that I work closely with Justin Brereton, who's a horticulture instructor here at the college, Yavapai College. And as part of his viticulture classes, he put together some videos and addressed the challenges of Arizona climate extremes in particular. And I'd like to jump out and play this video for you, and then I'll return after the video. So let me go out and find this.
Okay, hey class, well it's November 1st today, and in the earlier video I showed you in Cottonwood, Arizona, I showed you some vines close to the river, how the cold...
If you want to know why you're so tired so often, look at this banana. It's fresh, brightly colored, looks great, right?
Cold air settles. Well, Arizona's pretty diverse. Here we're looking at some vines. This is Vidal Blanc, which is a pretty hardy vine. But again, November 1st, we're in Chino Valley, Arizona. And so elevation here is about 4,500 feet. And this vine has frozen pretty good. This vine is done for the year. These have already lost all of their foliage. Temperature, we have a sensing gauge here on the greenhouse in Chino Valley. Temperatures here were down to 25 degrees, and so that, again, that was in that same time frame about a week and a half ago. So mid to late October, hard freeze, vines are done. I showed you in that earlier video, those vines were just frosted a bit. These vines are shut down, these are done, and we'll have on these tip dieback quite a ways. Now again, these are young vines, these are only in their second leaf. These vines were actually propagated by the viticulture class the last time when I taught it in person. And so these are kind of in an experimental row. There's only about 20 vines or so here, different varieties, and we're attempting to determine which ones are best suited to the cold temperatures that Chino Valley can experience. And so I wanted to tell you about, as far as cold goes, the temperatures that, the minimum temperatures, as far as vine tolerance to those minimum temperatures. A vine like this, -5 degrees, and it's starting to then see some damage. Most of your Vitis vinifera vines, you start approaching 0, you start having some damage. There's some varieties, I think Merlot is one, that doesn't like it much lower than 15 degrees or so. So depending on the region you're in, it determines, and you guys are thinking about this as far as your vine selection goes for your presentation, matching the variety to the region, the temperatures of that region. And so you would, if you're growing in the Chino Valley area, one of your issues is not so much the cold temperatures. Again, I said it could get down to -5. There's hybrid vines, there's American varieties that will do well here. Lot of hybrid varieties would do well. But it's the wind. You notice this is just a normal day in Chino. Leaves are blowing around. Just these open plains, 40, 50 mile per hour winds aren't uncommon. And I was checking, like I said, temperatures. It also has these extreme spring and fall temperatures where it's approaching 85, 90 degrees in the daytime and still touching down close to freezing at night. That's just, it's pretty wacky. And so Arizona has quite a bit of diversity as far as temperatures go. you know, up around the Flagstaff area, moving west from Flagstaff through Belmont, Williams, all that high ground north of the Mogollon Rim there is 7,000 feet elevation or higher. San Francisco Peaks up to 12,000, I think 12,600 feet is a high spot in Arizona. But everywhere south of the Mogollon Rim, you start to drop off. And I mentioned in the other video, get these mid-elevation ranges. This would be considered one of those four-season type climates. Max high temperatures in the summer, typically in the low 100s, but many stretches of time where it's in the 80s and 90 degrees in the summertime for high temperatures, and cooling off quickly at night into the 60s or so, even in the summertime. And again, winter temperatures from here over into the Prescott area, we're touching zero most winters. Extremely cold winters might go down -5 or so. But as you move south from here, you start to move down into the valleys, the lower elevations of Yavapai County, down into Phoenix. You really start bumping up the temperatures. You start moving into the lower Sonoran Desert area where typical summer temperatures, 115 for maximum highs, maybe not even dipping below 90 degrees in some of the warmer nights. And now winters in Phoenix are typically not going much below freezing. So if you had some vines growing in Phoenix, your issue there is them not even going dormant, not even reaching dormancy when there's not a frost, there's not that cooling period of time. It's still 90 degrees in Phoenix, and it's November 1st. So vines there, they're kind of, you have to have specific varieties that will do well in the really, really hot temperatures, but also in the warm winter. To move, I mean, it only gets worse as you move over towards the Colorado River Valley. Highs 118, 119 are common, lows down near 90 degrees as summertime temperatures, and winter temperatures typically in the 60s or 70s, with lows typically staying above freezing. Some of them will get touched by a bit of frost, but not much. In downtown Phoenix, you're not going to see freeze very frequently. But as you start to move towards the southeast, you run into Tucson. The climate starts to get moister. You start to experience more summer rainfall patterns. The cold fronts in the wintertime kind of sweep in from the west, and we get gentler rains, but it doesn't matter. The vines are dormant. And not a lot of moisture accumulates in the root zone. And so typically what we're dealing with is summer rainfall, and as you start to move from the rim and south, you get quite a bit of rainfall in those areas. The lower deserts, it's very sporadic, and you really shouldn't count on it. You need to have your irrigation in place, and making sure you're probably watering on a strict schedule. And then as you move into southeastern Arizona, the months of July, August, and a lot of times September is typical of monsoon season. And those areas southeast of Tucson down towards Wilcox, Sonoyta, the Dragoon Mountains, areas there can receive during the 3-month, they could receive up to 12 inches of rain or more, depending on elevation and how wet the season is. And a lot of that moisture comes from the south, and it's spurred on by high pressure system setting up in just the right area, a thermal low set up near the Yuma area. Those work together, pulling moisture down from the south, and it just filters into those areas. So they get quite a bit of rainfall. And as you start to move up in elevation, you start to experience those 4-season climates again. And so Wilcox, for instance, has very similar climate to, let's say, the Verde Valley, areas of the Verde Valley. Extreme warmth in the summertime, cold winter night temperatures, and so quite diversity there. But grapes do really well in that climate, that elevation, and that 5,000 foot elevation down in the southeast is some of the highest elevation growing grapes in the world. And so that's just a little bit of the roller coaster of diversity of weather in Arizona, and as you kind of experience the climate. And again, grapes can grow. There's a lot of different varieties. Grapes can find a niche in all those climates, from Flagstaff down to Yuma. You kind of cross the gamut of the whole state as far as climate goes.
Okay, continuing on then. Thank you, Justin. It's also important to know your soil as you consider growing grapes. The ideal table grape soil is a deep, light, silty or sandy clay, sandy loam. So the loam being a combination of silt and clay and sand-sized particles. And conversely, the classic grape soil is thin and rather poor, so that the vines struggle, and that equates to a more intense grape flavor. However, grapes can adapt to a wide range of soils typical of the Prescott areas, but are best suited in the well-drained soil. So a well-drained soil is one that probably has some sand content to it, like a loam. If it was 100% clay, that's not going to drain very well. If you dug a hole and filled it with water and it just doesn't drain, that's not going to be the best environment for the grapevine. So not all grapevines like the same type of soil. Some vines have less vigor, small berries, and it's just not a good variety to soil match. Maybe it's the pH of the soil, which ties up the nutrients, makes them less plant available. When you have high pH, the micronutrients like iron and others. Now pH can be mitigated, but the vine is not going to thrive. Some vines are not going to thrive if they just don't like the soil that they're in. So choosing plants, there's a variety of ways to acquire grapevine stock, grape plant stock. You can get prune cuttings that are dormant hardwood cuttings that are unrooted. The dormant bare root plants are probably 1-year-old plants that were rooted out and you're buying them as 1-year-old cuttings then. Rooted and potted plants are a very common way to buy locally here. Most table grapes will be on their own roots, which means they are ungrafted. And wine grapes, they're often grafted onto disease-resistant rootstock. The plant sources, of course, are going to be the online nurseries, local nurseries and retailers. Although if you have a neighbor who has an exceptional variety of grape that he's growing out there, and he's pruning in the springtime, usually those are just trash type of thing. But grapevine cuttings are easy to start. And I'll have another Justin video here coming up that'll show that. Rooted plants can be the 1-gallon size. There's no need to purchase older and larger plants because you're going to be cutting that vine back to just a few buds or a vigorous basal shoot. Now that's a hard thing to do, to buy the vine that's maybe you have a 2 or 3 feet of growth and to cut that growth off. But the logic there is that in the first year of that plant, you're going to be encouraging root development. And if the vine is vigorous enough, you might go ahead and let a shoot grow out to form a straight trunk. But cutting it back, that the straggly shoot that is on that 1-gallon size plant is the approach for the first season. And choosing table grape varieties. These are some of my favorite seedless ones based on hardiness and production from my vineyard. But there are lots of varieties, more than what I have out here. And you just have to do the individual research. Usually if you're buying online, they'll always describe what zones, plant hardiness zones they're suited for, that type of thing. But the cold climate varieties that I have found suited to the 7B climate, that'd be the winter low temperatures, and the soil we have here are Glenora, Reliance, Vanessa, Saturn, Neptune, Ramaley, Himrod, and Hope. But my vineyard is still maturing, and some vines haven't really produced yet. They're still a little too young. So there are results still to come on some additional varieties that might get added to this list. I do have a couple of marginally suited seedless table grapes. And that would be the Interlaken and Flame. Both of those in mine, they usually freeze to the ground. They come back every year. They come back vigorously, quite vigorously. And sometimes make grapes, but you always have to start from zero at the ground level, it seems, with these varieties, either freezing to the ground or freezing and dying from the cold climate we have here. They apparently are just a little suited to a somewhat warmer climate. And there are some seeded table grape varieties that I can recommend. The Swenson is one that has an exceptional flavor to it. It has a seed that you have to work your way through. And then marginally suited, at least in my vineyard, is Concord. Now it's a popular East Coast variety, but in my vineyard, it seems like there's just not enough growing season. The vines are kind of scraggly. They haven't developed much caliper and much diameter to them. The cordons are just, even after 7 or 8 years, are just barely starting to form some cordons to them. And it's uneven ripening as well. There's a lot of green grapes, some blue grapes. So marginally suited, at least in my vineyard. There are some wine grape varieties that are suited to the Chino Valley, Zone 3 or Region 3. And these are just the ones that are grown at Granny Creek Vineyard, which is about a quarter mile or less from where I live right here, which is the reason I included their varieties. There may be some others that do well, but this is what they grow there here in Chino Valley, Granny Creek Vineyard. Propagating grapes, it's pretty easy to do. Acquiring cuttings from early spring grapevine prunings. This is the neighbor example I alluded to earlier. These cuttings are dormant, or you can order cuttings, grapevine cuttings. There's an online seller that has them available. And what I'd like to do now is play this short video again from Justin, showing how to propagate grapes from dormant hardwood cuttings. So take it away, Justin.
Okay, class, today we're talking about hardwood cuttings. So the first thing you want to think about is harvesting your material. And so this hardwood cuttings were taken during the dormant season. These happen to be grapes. They're hemrod. They were tagged right after they were cut. They've been kept in a cool, dormant place, and a paper towel wrapped around the bottom. That cool place was a refrigerator, and so we can process these when we want. Hardwood cuttings are very forgiving. There's no leaves, there's no transpiration occurring to offset the fact that there's no roots. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to put roots on these quickly. So the most ideal way to put roots on a hardwood cutting is cool, moist conditions up top and warm conditions below. The warm conditions below in the media will help roots to form and callus. And so we have this material here. It's all tagged, it's all labeled. I have here some Cabernet grape cuttings. Here's an example of a hardwood cutting. So what you have to make certain that you have is one node, this is where a set of leaves were, below the ground, and one set above, because that's where the buds are going to come. In the case of this Cabernet cutting, we could make 5 or 6, but we want some size to them because this is the size container we're going to be putting them in. And again, I've tagged it, the date, February 11th, grape Cabernet. It's a wine grape, and these are going for the sale. That's the first week in May. And so ideally, we want to get these started. We want to get roots on them and leafed out, rooted out in time for the sale, but not sitting in here for many, many months becoming root bound. This pot is deep, which forces the roots to go down. These holes are big here at the bottom, which results in some air pruning. And so what we're going to do, you take your trusty pruners, you've cleaned these off, you've sterilized them, you're looking for uniformity. So in this case, I might do something about the size of these pruners, looking at these spacing on the nodes. So I'm going to cut above a bud. Here is the bud. There's actually 3 buds there. You get 3 chances for this to occur. And then I have a bud here, so I could cut this here and roots would come from the bottom and from the top. But these are kind of deep pots, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to force 2 into top growth, and I'm going to force 2 into root growth. To do that, you got to make sure you cut that bud out. Sometimes you can just rub it out, but you want to change it from being vegetative to eventually becoming roots. And so I'll rub out the bottom one as well. And so you got opportunity for roots to come out here, here, and from the cut end on the bottom. You have potential for buds to come out here and here. And not only do you have primary buds, but you have secondary buds and tertiary buds in there. So the primary buds will come out, they'll come out fast and strong. And so again, that's why we're timing this, planting on February 11th to coincide with an early May sale. If we were planning on sticking these and moving them on, bumping them up, we talked about transplanting into larger containers. We would start them here, move them on. We might even do them in flats like we were doing with the softwood cuttings, and then pull them out when they're calloused and rooted. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to assist the rooting process. Dormant hardwood cuttings, and especially grapes, do really well. I have some wisteria, I have some figs, we're going to do some blackberries. We can do a number of different hardwood type cuttings. And so what we're going to do is we're going to dust these to speed up the process. So I've taken some Hormex rooting powder. I put it in a separate baggie. Normally I'd make about 5 or 10 of these, bundle them together, stick them in here. I want to just dust it around and not cake it on, but just lightly dusted. You don't want to breathe this stuff. You want to wear a mask if you're doing a lot of these. So this is lightly dusted. Now I'm going to bury it this deep. I don't want to just push it straight down into my soil pot. So what I've done ahead of time is I've hollowed out a little spot. I used a marker when I did it last time. And now I'm going to insert my cutting. I'm going to pinch the soil around here. And again, the conditions that I'm going to provide for this grape are going to be cool and moist up top and warm down below. Being in a black pot on a black table or expanded metal table, hopefully they'll warm up enough below and roots will come out. Grapes are pretty easy. If I was worried about this, I would put them on the heat mat. Some of our more tricky hardwood cuttings we will put on the heat mat to facilitate that process. And the soil, the media that I've chosen to put in this pot is sterile because we don't want to encourage any disease issues in a controlled environment situation. But we have an equal mixture of perlite and peat. We have 50-50, so this is going to drain well. To keep the tops cool, I'm going to spray and mist these. The goal is for the cut end, these cells, the hormone rooting powder is going to help, but from that cut end, those cells are going to change from vegetative cells to rooting cells, and then those cells are going to push roots out. We hope they'll callus and root before the top buds come out. And typically, the top buds will come out about the same time as the roots, and then you'll have success. But if you take too much top or leave too many nodes in the top and not enough below the soil.
Cut that one just a little bit short for the sake of moving on, but yeah, I think you get the idea of how easy it is to propagate grapes from dormant hardwood cuttings there. Thank you, Justin. Planting the grape cuttings in late May after the last spring freeze is the way to go. Full sun location, planting hole as large as just enough to accommodate the roots. You don't have to dig excess size hole. If the vines are grafted, don't plant the graft union below the soil line. And no need for compost or soil amendments in the planting hole. Irrigating them, I've inserted this table from the California Master Gardener Handbook, which shows starting in April, they start ramping up their irrigation schedule. This is in gallons of water per day per vine. So 1 gallon of water per day per vine in April, ramping up to 10 gallons of water per day and at the peak of vine growth in August. And then after harvest, they start cutting back, leading up to dormancy, probably in November, in this particular case in the Central Valley. You can drip irrigate with 1 or 2 gallon per hour emitters, which work well, watering deeply to encourage the roots to grow down. And then about a month before the first predicted fall frost, start to cut back on the water so that you're easing your vine into dormancy. You don't want to have the door slam shut on it by having encouraged growth all the way up to the first frost date, and then it freezes, and it's just a little too stressful on that vine. Fertilizing is the subject here. Watering young vines is more important than fertilizing. Withhold fertilizer unless you see symptoms of nutrient deficiency, and that might be pale green foliage associated with a nitrogen deficiency. But nutrients most likely to show deficiencies are nitrogen, potassium, magnesium, and boron. In the first year of planting, probably 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce of nitrogen is all the plant needs. So if you're using 16, 16, 16 fertilizer, probably just 6 or 7 ounces will be enough to get you to that ratio. Second year, you can add more fertilizer, probably double that same amount. But on a mature plant, too much fertilizer results in the plant energy going into more vegetative growth and not necessarily bigger grapes. Structured training, you can do trellising, arbor, a fence, or head trained. Head train is the old school way of doing it before steel wire was invented, where you just have a post and it grows up and kind of fountain flows back down towards the ground. There are several rules of thumb for vine development, those being season 1, first growing season after planting, you want to focus on root development. Season 2 is trunk development, going up towards the fruiting wires. Season 3 is now training your cordons and canes to go laterally. Season 4 is partial fruit development. And to get to partial, you have to thin out probably 50% of your fruit, that being the grape bunches, either cutting them in half or cutting half the bunches out. And then season 5, it's just now starting to be a fully mature grapevine. You can let it go to full fruit development. Now there might be some short circuiting of these. You might get root and trunk if it's a very vigorous growing vine. Root and trunk in season 1. So it might be that in season 4, you can go to full fruit development then. Table grapes are not harvested until they're mature. They don't ripen after harvest. They're picked after they reach the optimum stage of acceptability in appearance and flavor. And so it's important to know the characteristic color of a certain variety so you know when to pick it. And also the sugar content, of course, influences the taste. And you can measure that with an instrument, but the way I just do it is to sample as you harvest. Does this grape taste like it has sugar content worthy of being harvested yet? And in Chino Valley, this area, harvest begins in mid-August, ends in mid-October. And unlike wine grapes, table grapes are seldom harvested all at one time. There might be 5 pickings that are necessary on your table grapes before you get them all off the vine. So it's kind of smeared out over the season. Pruning is necessary to get quality fruit. Quality fruit might be bigger berries, bigger grapes. And 90% of the vine is going to be pruned out every year. This regulates the amount of crop. Unmanaged vines are unlikely to produce, unmanaged vines are likely to produce small berries. So if you just don't prune your grapevines, you're going to get a lot of bunches with small grapes on them. And so to make the vines manageable and the fruit accessible, you'd also want to prune. 2 pruning approaches are performed every year. It's either a cane prune vine, which is production off of last year's green shoots on that cane, or spur pruning, which is production from permanent cordons. These are laterals that are permanently on the wire, and they're producing from spurs on those permanent cordons. So a couple of different pruning approaches, and when you buy a grape or do your research on it from the seller, if it's a website, a lot of them will say whether it's a cane pruned or spur pruned grape. If you don't know which approach to use, they say it's always best to use the cane pruning approach. And that pruning occurs in the dormant season. That's usually January through March in the Prescott area. I do mine in March and then take a lot of the cuttings out to the college where students can work with them, just like in that video that Justin showed. So here's the annual cycle of a grapevine, starting with bud break in March or April. That vine flowers and the fruit is set in May right now. In the summer months, May through July, you would do canopy managing, maybe thinning the shoots, thinning the crop a little bit, trying to optimize the size of the berries, leading up to veraison, which is when the grapes start to change color and the sugar content starts to increase, leading to harvest in August and October, through October, and finally winter pruning in January through March here. Now these months are going to vary depending on your climate zone and where you're located at. This one was clearly a little bit warmer climate because their bud break is in March. Ours is in April here in Chino Valley. Grape pests and diseases. Gophers, birds, deer and antelope, rabbits can all sample, and you need to trap or control those with well, gopher traps. Birds use netting. Deer and antelope probably going to take fencing. It might be a little more difficult to keep them out. Rabbits like to sample, and I use these grow tubes to keep the rabbits off of any green shoots until that trunk starts to get a little woodier. Insects, this is a grape leaf skeletonizer, can be a problem here. I haven't had any of those problems. Yellow jackets and bees like to get in the bunches of grapes that are with the sugar content coming up. They like to get out and mine out the grapes for the sugar water. And that's a hard one to control because bees are a beneficial insect. And you may just have to live with some of the damage they do. Weeds, the morning glory or bindweed are my biggest issue here in this vineyard. Mustard weed can also be a problem, but it's an annual, but readily recedes. Diseases can include powdery mildew and crown gall, but the American varieties of table grapes typically are not prone to the same types of soil diseases that wine grapes are subject to. So let me quickly run through a case history example of my vineyard and illustrate some of the points that I just made in this presentation. First of all, climate zone 7B, but even though I'm on level land, I'm not in a river valley or really any kind of valley. I have a microclimate such that the daytime temps are several degrees warmer and night temps are several degrees cooler, maybe even up to 10 degrees cooler than other areas of Chino Valley. I have a 2 to 3 foot deep soil horizon of sandy clay loam. It's alkaline soil, 7 to 8.2. And that's a little bit high, but still the grapes, I think, are doing well enough in it that justified me moving ahead with my site evaluation. You know, I live right next door to a commercial vineyard, so my logic was if they can grow grapes in their area, then I can grow grapes in my area. So that's important to know too, is what's going on in your immediate area, what others are doing. Here I have my planting holes. You can see the soil texture here, not a rock in there. Sandy clay loam, 8 feet between my holes that I'm planting in. I made them extra big because I put this gopher basket in here, but the holes that you might want to do in your area can be smaller if you don't have a gopher issue. 10 feet between the rows so that I get the tractor up and down to maintain vines in the rows. I oriented my rows north-south so that I could get air movement down the rows from the prevailing southwest winds. And also didn't want to shade the vines by having them go east-west when they're north-south, why there's not as much shading going on. I have a trellis system, 4 wires. Bottom wire holds my poly tubing that has the irrigation line. 2 fruiting wires, one at 36 inches, one at 54, and a top catch wire that holds my bird netting. I have end posts and earth anchors to so I can tension up on the wires and hold that post from moving. I installed a drip irrigation system before I even planted the first vine. I put this, had my irrigation system ready to go. And here we see I use well water from a deep well and a pump that's solar powered, so I don't have to pay for power. It pumps while the sun shines. I have 2 gallon per hour emitters, 2 of them for each vine, so 4 gallon per hour emitters going to each of these grapevines that are shown here. Propagating and planting, I've selected the cold hardy varieties from upstate New York. Started the dormant hardwood cuttings in mid-March, developed roots, and planted them out in the vineyard by June 1st, which is after the last frost date pretty much. Planting only as deep as the pot, and each one had a tag with the pruning approach, the variety, and the berry color. So the first season vines, focusing primarily on root development, but if they're vigorous enough, I'm training them to the stake going up towards the fruiting wires. Second season vines, I'm focusing primarily on the trunk development. And here we can see the laterals that I'm training to the wire, but we don't allow any fruit so that the plant strength goes to the roots and vines. So even in the first year, they're going to try and form small grape clusters, but again, hard to do, but you have to cut those out to try and force the energy into forming a better root structure. Vines entering their third season. I've got, in my vineyard, I have a good trunk structure going. A lot of these vines are now being trained to the wire on the fruiting wires, allowing some fruit to develop, but probably cutting out about 50% of the fruit to get better looking bunches, bigger grape sizes. Minimizing the pest damage in my vineyard. Birds are my big issue that want to get into the grapes and eat them. So I use side netting, which hangs from the top catch wire and forms on each side of the vine. So it forms like an envelope around the vine, and it pretty effectively excludes most of the birds. There are some that are persistent and find their way in. But you can see this is pretty small mesh. It's a 3 millimeter by 5 millimeter mesh, not bird netting that is 1 inch diameter that I think a lot of birds can find their way through it. And there's a side benefit of this. We get some pretty good thunderstorms here in the valley, and it limits hail damage. So the side netting on here keeps your leaves and your berries from getting damaged by being struck by hail. It may even give you some benefit by limiting the amount of sun scald on your berries. I haven't had any disease issues. I have learned to coexist with bindweed. I can never get rid of it. I just try and keep it from flowering as best as I can, but it always comes back. And it can be controlled with glyphosate or an herbicide, but I've chosen not to go that route. And then trapping gophers is needed. If they get in the red zone, which is anywhere between or in the planting row, anywhere in the row, they're going to get trapped. I fertigate utilizing a fertilizer injector. So I have liquid fertilizer that is suctioned out and injected right into the irrigation line that's delivered to each vine then through the irrigation water, fertilizer through the irrigation water. I have zoned irrigation so that this pump output can handle 80 vines all at one time. So I have a number of zones here that it waters all at the same time. Pruning, cane prune vines. This cane right here was last year's green growth going each direction. spur pruned. You can see the shaggy bark on the trunk and the shaggy bark on the lateral, because spur prune vine, a spur prune vine has a permanent cordon here. This part always stays here. This cane on the upper photo gets cut out and a replacement takes its place. So a green shoot from this year will take the place of this cane next year. Weather monitoring, I have a weather station that lets me know the temps and humidity and rainfall, other parameters that it's a wireless system, so I can see the data in my office and archives the data as well. But if freezing temps occur after bud break, no, I have no active measures to mitigate freezing temps. And occasional crop losses are expected. And you know, just a few days ago on Sunday, we had a pretty damaging cold weather snap. Dry cold front passes through. The next morning, when the winds have calmed down, cloudless sky, the earth is re-radiating to the atmosphere and temperatures plummet. And we were below freezing for several hours, which did a lot of damage to the vineyard. And I'm just not big enough of a vineyard to warrant some of the active measures. Like in Granite Creek Vineyard, they use a wind turbine to mix the air, the warm and cold air, and have been successful in their commercial ventures. I have 43 grape varieties in my experimental vineyard. So record keeping is more of a task than a simple backyard setup, but I like to use Microsoft OneNote. So each of these tabs represents a different set of information. And you can easily find the information on your vineyard using this particular program. If I have enough of excess in my harvest, I take them to the Prescott Farmers Market and sell them. And this was my vineyard in its 5th through 9th seasons, Saturday morning before the big freeze on Sunday morning. So you see a lot of green right here. It looks pretty good. It doesn't look so good right now, but it'll be back. The vines are not dead. The green will come back and it'll be good. Maybe not this season, not as good as if we hadn't had that freeze, but can only hope for next year. Here are a number of references and sources of additional information that you may want to check out if you have an interest. And with that is my last slide. And there's Tricia, and I'd be willing to take, as best as I can, your questions.
Well, we have a number of them. They came in and rolling in from the beginning. So we're going to go back, think back to the GDD days.
Okay.
Sarah asked, are the GDD days based on the low for the day?
They are an average of the daily high and the daily low. So you take high plus the low divided by 2. And then you have to use the 50-degree temperature. Over 50 degrees, the grapevine starts to become active. So there's a base 50 in there too. I'd have to look at the formula. It's a pretty simple formula, but it's the daily high plus the daily low and averaging that out. And I believe it's subtracting 50 from that to get the GDD. Okay.
Wendy asked, what do we do with those young vines that were killed with our latest freeze? Where Wendy is, they hit a low of 27 for several hours last Saturday. She was in Paulden.
Right. You know, if it's a vine that was just planted this year, like you got a newly, if you got one from the Yavapai College plant sale, for example, it may have killed it. But if it's a small vine that was one from last year, it probably has a root system developed to it, and it'll try pushing out new shoots. It has enough of a root system developed that it'll push out new shoots from the base. And if you're lucky and had just planted a newly planted grapevine, it may also try and push out new shoots. So not all hope is lost. Just have to give it some time and look at the base, look for that new light green shoot to be pushing out. And and the first 3 years of getting these vines going are always going to be the most difficult until they get some size to them. Difficult in the sense that they're always going to be a little more frost sensitive, and they may have to start over again the next year after being killed to the ground. But I went through that with my vineyard. A couple of years of the first 2 years, frozen to the ground, but most of them came back.
I'm going to have some other questions, but would you put up your second to last frame with the additional reading? Perfect. Oops. It disappeared. There you go. Okay, Margaret wants to know, will the suckers fruit or should they be removed?
Suckers should be removed, especially if they're coming from the base. You might get some suckers along the trunk that are too low for your fruiting wires. If you already have your structured vine structure formed, they may start to form fruit, the suckers, but I'm going to be pulling mine out once my frost damage becomes a little more known to me. If it looks like the vine has been killed, the upper part of the structure, I may want to save one or two of those suckers at the base to take over for that portion that was killed. So if your vineyard is in a frost damage area, I'd wait a little bit before you get too anxious to prune out a lot of things. But in a vineyard that is not frost damaged, anything coming out of the base is material to be taken off.
Bill asked, how old should the vines be in order to produce?
Probably year 4 is, year 3, you might go to 50% production, year 4, maybe 50%. Vine is usually not considered mature until it's in about year 5, and that's when you can let it start to go to full production.
Okay. Cheryl asks, what are you using for your gopher baskets?
Just chicken wire. I get 4-foot wide chicken wire and cut it in half. And that way it's in the hole by 2 feet, the bottom part is 6 inches. If there's an enterprising gopher that wants to go down 36 inches and come up the bottom, go past the chicken wire underneath, why have at it. But I'm counting on 24 inches of wire to stop most of them.
Lauren wants to know, does the intensity of the monsoon season impact the growing season?
I don't think so. You get some additional rainfall, which might mean a more vigorous growing grape. You might be able to cut back on your water, your supplied water, by counting on rainfall. But I don't think it affects the growing season that much. You get a lot of in the monsoon season. Usually you get about 6 hours of good sunlight, and then it starts to cloud up around 1 p.m. And so you've already gotten a lot of good sun, and then you get clouds that obscure the sun. So I don't think that would be an issue for the growing season.
Cheryl had several questions for you, so I'm just going to give you all of them one at a time. Which weather station are you using? Do you like it, or would you get a different one?
I have a Davis VP2, Vantage Pro 2. And I like it. I like the wireless system because I can sit right here. I'm looking at my console and I can tell you that it's 71.6 degrees outside. And it's a little bit of a pricey system. There are some others that are not as pricey, but it's a professional model that gives me all the data that I need for monitoring weather out here.
Have you tried muscadines?
Somebody gave me a plant several years ago. And muscadines are typically for the deep south. They like a lot of humidity. And so she gave it to me as a very small cutting, and it didn't live. I maybe didn't give it what it was wanting, or maybe it was just not the humidity that it liked. But I tried one, but it didn't live, and so it is history. But my understanding is the muscadine grapes are for the humid deep south.
Got it. She wanted to know also, what was your fertilizing schedule again?
Fertilizing with my relatively mature grapes, once a month I give them 7 ounces of UN32, which is urea nitrogen in the form of urea. 32 meaning 32% nitrogen. I give my 80 vine zone 7 ounces through the irrigation water. Each zone gets 7 ounces, and do that once a month. I can't remember if I made the point, but if you give them too much fertilizer, they tend to get too much green, too much vegetative growth at the expense of growing bigger grapes. So I think that it seems to be doing okay with that 7 ounce per month, starting April. So I do, when they're budding out, to give them the first dose of UN32, April, May, June, and July. And then I let them coast through up to dormancy.
Okay. Cheryl also said she had grapes, got grapes in a pot staked with trunk already formed. When that is planted, would it be considered year 2 or year 1 still? If year 1, would you prune it down?
If it were year 1, the recommendation is and it depends how that trunk looks. If it's kind of has a lot of dog legs in it and just isn't a very strong looking trunk, I'd cut it back to a couple of buds above the soil line and train it to be a nice straight trunk. If you already in year 2, your year 2 plant has a nice straight trunk to it, then just tie it up to a stake and let it start growing up to the fruiting wire then.
Okay, the next one is an interesting one. We've never had this challenge opportunity, so we'll see how we do. And I think this is probably going to be our last one. Corey asked, hey, Rich, my first year vines have brown hair-like fuzz on them. So if you look in the chat box, she's attached 2 different pictures that if you open them up, they'll actually show on your screen. We'll all see them. And see if you have any idea what they might be.
Okay. Well, this is going to be challenging. Let's see here, chat box.
Chat box is probably on the bottom of the screen. If you put your cursor down there, everything should show.
Well, I have it I don't see the chat box at the top. Mine is at the top here, Tricia.
Okay.
And I'm not sure I can see it.
Is it under more maybe?
I'm looking at more. There's chat. Okay. And I'll scroll up and down to see if I can see some photos.
It's almost to the bottom. Came in at 7:37, which we're a little bit over. And guys, I really appreciate you hanging in here. Rich has done wonderful. While he's looking at that, let me tell you, we do want you to do some save the dates. Our next talk is going to be on Thursday, June 17th at 6:30, and it's on pollinators. We're really excited. One of our newest master gardeners here in Yavapai County just graduated our class, but she is a certified master gardener from Ohio, is going to be doing that class. Her name's Diane Katanaga. And then just 2 short weeks later, also on Thursday, July 1st, Kathleen Coram is going to be doing grafting, and she will go in depth on grafting, which I know if you've been enjoying some of the things that we've seen here, you'd probably love the extension of that. So that's what we have coming up. Do you think you're going to be able to, Rich?
Not with a lot of gyrations. I download it, and I think I'd have to jump out of screen sharing.
If folks want to hang on, great. I can actually, if you stop sharing, I can pop it up.
Okay.
We want to thank everybody tonight for being here with us. And let's see. Okay, picture number 1. Share screen. Share. Who knows what you guys are going to, oh, it is coming up as a save. There it is. Can you see it on my screen?
I can see it.
And
It looks kind of gooey. Is it fuzzy though?
I see a little bit of fuzz on the bottom. I'm trying to get that second one to come up. That's still the first one. Okay, and I would say she's probably talking about there's something. That looks fuzzy right there. And then all of this looks fuzzy.
Well, I am not sure.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm not sure. I initially thought powdery mildew, but I don't think we've had the right conditions yet for powdery mildew. And powdery mildew really doesn't look like that. It might be another type of mold or mildew, but I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough. Well, everybody, thank you again. We'll go ahead and stop our presentation for tonight. I do want to thank our behind the scenes folks, Bill Maines and Lauren Paz, for all their help. Have a great evening, and we can't wait to see you again at the next presentation.
Thank you, everybody.